In the shadows of towering pine trees, Marcus Anderson stood perfectly still, his unseeing eyes fixed forward as the massive wolf circled him. The air crackled with tension, heavy with the scent of rain and wild roses. The same wolf he had raised. From a pup, the one who had become his eyes in the darkness now growled with a primal fury that sent chills down his spine. Behind him, worried voices called his name, begging him to step away, but Marcus remained rooted to the spot. He could feel every vibration through the earth, every shift in the air as the wolf moved. This moment would determine everything, not just his fate, but the truth about whether love could truly bridge the gap between the wild and the tame. But to understand how Marcus Anderson found himself facing a wolf he had raised as his own, we need to return to where it all began, in the small mountain town of Pine Valley, Montana. Pine Valley wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. Nestled in the embrace of the Rocky Mountains, it was home to just over 2,000 souls who knew each other's stories as well as they knew the changing seasons. The town had its own rhythm, marked by the annual festivals, hunting seasons, and the quiet determination of people who chose to live close to nature. For Marcus Anderson, it was meant to be a refuge, a place to rebuild his life after losing his sight in military service. Marcus's cabin sat at the edge of town, where the carefully maintained streets gave way to wild forest. He had chosen it specifically for its solitude, though his sister Sarah had argued against it. "You need to be closer to people," she'd insisted, worry evident in her voice. But Marcus had been adamant. After losing his sight in an explosion during his final deployment with the Army Rangers, he craved the peace that came with being away from pitying whispers and well-meaning but suffocating assistance. He had learned to navigate his world through sound, touch, and smell. The crunch of pine needles under his boots told him where the forest began. The subtle change in air temperature marked the boundary between sun and shade. The rough bark of each tree had become a familiar friend, helping him map his territory with his fingers rather than his eyes. His military training had taught him to survive, and now he applied those skills to creating a new kind of life. That spring morning started like any other. Marcus was checking his property line, running his hand along the fence he had installed with old Jack Turner's help. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hints of warming weather and new growth. But something was different. A sound caught his attention, a weak whimper, barely audible over the morning bird song. Marcus paused, turning his head to better catch the sound. There it was again, coming from near the creek that marked the edge of his property. With careful steps, he made his way toward the noise, using his walking stick to navigate the uneven ground. The whimpering grew louder, accompanied by a scratching sound that spoke of desperation. As he drew closer, the smell hit him. Wet fur, blood, and something else, something wild. Marcus knelt carefully, reaching out with one hand. His fingers brushed against damp fur, and the creature flinched, but didn't retreat. It was small, probably no bigger than a house cat, and trembling violently. "Easy there, little one," Marcus murmured, keeping his voice soft and steady. His hands gently explored, building a picture in his mind. A pup, definitely canine, but something about its build felt different from a domestic dog. The skull shape, the ear placement, the texture of the fur. Years of experience with military working dogs had taught him to recognize these details by touch. This was no dog. This was a wolf pup. Marcus's heart raced as the realization sank. In wolf packs hadn't been seen in this part of Montana for years, though there were occasional rumors of sightings in the deeper wilderness. This pup was alone, injured and based on its size, far too young to survive on its own. He knew he should call the ranger station. Mike Reynolds, the local wildlife officer, would know what to do. It was the sensible thing, the right thing. But as the pup pressed against his hand, seeking warmth, something deeper than reason took hold. This creature was alone, vulnerable, cast aside by fate, just as he had been when the explosion took his sight and nearly his life. The decision was made before he even fully realized it. Shrugging off his jacket, Marcus carefully wrapped the pup, feeling it relax slightly in the warmth of the fabric. "Looks like we both could use a friend," he whispered, cradling the small bundle against his chest. The walk back to his cabin was slow and careful. The pup remained surprisingly quiet, as if understanding the need for discretion. Inside, Marcus retrieved the first aid kit he kept meticulously organized. His fingers found the antiseptic wipes, gauze, and bandages exactly where he knew they would be. As he cleaned the pup's wounds, mostly superficial scratches and one deeper cut on its hind leg, he talked softly, constantly, letting his voice become a source of comfort. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he mused, feeling the pup's steady heartbeat under his hands. "We'll call you Shadow, because you'll be my shadow until we figure this out." But Marcus wasn't naive. He knew that taking in a wolf pup, no matter how well-intentioned, was going to raise concerns. The first challenge came that very afternoon when Sarah dropped by for her weekly visit. "Marcus?" her voice carried from the front door, followed by the familiar sound of her footsteps. "Why do I smell wet dog? And what is that on your couch?" Marcus turned toward his sister's voice, one hand resting protectively near Shadow. "I found him this morning. He was injured." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concerns. Then Sarah's footsteps approached slowly. "That's Marcus, that's not a dog. That looks like a wolf pup." "I know. You know. Marcus, you can't keep a wolf. It's not safe, it's not legal, and it's definitely not sensible for someone who..." She caught herself, but Marcus could finish the sentence in his head. "For someone who can't see." "I'm calling Dr. Roberts," Sarah declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "That animal needs proper medical attention, and then we need to contact the wildlife authorities." Marcus nodded, knowing this was just the beginning of the challenges ahead. But as Shadow stirred beside him, pressing trustingly against his leg, he felt a certainty he couldn't explain. This creature needed him, and perhaps, in ways he didn't yet understand, he needed Shadow too. Dr. Emma Roberts arrived within the hour, her car crunching on the gravel driveway. Marcus had always appreciated the veterinarian's direct manner and genuine compassion for animals. She entered the cabin with Sarah, and Marcus could hear the slight catch in her breath when she saw Shadow. "Well," Emma said after a moment, "this is certainly not what I was expecting when Sarah called about an injured pup." He heard her set down her medical bag, followed by the rustle of her kneeling near the couch. "May I?" Marcus nodded gently, stroking Shadow's head to keep him calm as Emma began her examination. The pup remained surprisingly cooperative, only whimpering slightly when she touched the injured leg. "The good news is that none of the injuries are serious," Emma reported after a thorough check. "The bad news is that this is definitely a wolf. Pup, probably no more than 6 weeks old. Marcus, I know what you're thinking, but..." "I can't just abandon him," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "He was alone, injured. Something happened to his pack. He needs help. He needs professional wildlife rehabilitation," Sarah countered. "Marcus, be reasonable. This isn't like getting a guide dog. This is a wild animal." "Every domestic dog started as a wild animal," Marcus replied quietly. "Someone, somewhere, had to be the first to bridge that gap." The room fell silent, except for Shadow's soft breathing. Finally, Emma spoke again, her tone thoughtful. "Legally, we should contact the wildlife authorities, but..." She paused, and Marcus could hear her moving closer. "I've known you for 3 years, Marcus. I've seen how you've adapted, how you've rebuilt your life. If, and this is a big if, we could get the proper permits and oversight. Would you be willing to work with me on this, to do it right? Emma, Sarah protested, but Marcus was already nodding. Whatever it takes, he promised. I'll do everything by the book. Just give us a chance. And so began a journey that would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about trust, nature, and the bonds that can form between the most unlikely of companions. Shadow would need more than just medical care and food. He would need guidance, training, and a bridge between his wild nature and the human world. What no one in that room could know was how this decision would not only change Marcus's life, but would eventually challenge the entire town's perception of what was possible. When love and trust defied the boundaries of nature itself. Don't miss what happens next in this extraordinary tale of trust and transformation. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell to catch the next part of this incredible journey. Your support means the world to us, and together we'll discover how this unique bond between a blind man and a wolf pup unfolds in ways no one could have predicted. The early morning mist clung to the ground as Marcus made his way through his daily routine, his footsteps accompanied by the soft padding of Shadow's paws on the wooden floor. 2 months had passed since he'd found the wolf pup. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And already their lives had fallen into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Each morning began with Shadow guiding Marcus through his exercises, the pup learning to alert him to obstacles with gentle nudges and warning growls. Dr. Emma Roberts visited 3 times a week, monitoring Shadow's growth and helping Marcus develop a training program that respected both the pup's wild nature and the need for basic obedience. The wolf pup was growing rapidly, his fuzzy coat giving way to sleeker fur, his playful stumbles becoming graceful movements that Marcus could track by sound alone. He's responding remarkably well to the training, Emma observed one morning. While Shadow worked through the scent detection exercises they'd developed, the pup had learned to identify different herbs from Marcus's garden, a skill that served both as mental stimulation and practical assistance. But we need to talk about what happens when he gets bigger. Marcus ran his fingers through Shadow's fur, feeling the subtle changes in the pup's muscle structure. I've been thinking about that. Old Jack helped me reinforce the fencing around the property. We're adding height and dig guards. Emma's silence spoke volumes. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Marcus, we're not just talking about containment. Shadow's growing faster than a domestic dog would. In a few months, he'll be strong enough to... She paused, choosing her words carefully. The town council is already asking questions. The mention of the council made Marcus straighten his spine. He'd been expecting this. Sheriff Tom Parker had visited last week, ostensibly for a friendly chat, but Marcus had sensed the underlying concern in his voice. The town was watching, waiting for any sign that this experiment in trust might turn dangerous. Tell me about the council meeting, Marcus said, keeping his voice steady as Shadow pressed against his leg, sensing his tension. Emma sighed, and he heard her settle into the old armchair by the window. They're split. Some, like Mary from the diner, are supportive. She says tourism has actually increased since word got out about the blind man and his wolf. But others, especially the ranchers on the outskirts of town, they're worried about setting a precedent. Marcus nodded, understanding their fears. Pine Valley had a history with wolves, stories passed down through generations about lost livestock and dangerous encounters. But Shadow was different. The pup had shown an extraordinary capacity for gentleness, especially around Marcus's limitations. What they don't understand, Marcus began, running his hand along Shadow's now familiar shape, is that this isn't just about keeping a wild animal as a pet. Shadow and we're learning from each other. He's teaching me to see the world in new ways. As if understanding, Shadow let out a soft whine and pressed his nose into Marcus's palm. The pup had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate Marcus's needs, warning him of approaching visitors before they reached the door, guiding him away from fallen branches on their walks, even fetching specific items when named. "Show her, Shadow," Marcus commanded softly. "Find the medicine." They had practiced this dozens of times. Shadow's claws clicked against the wooden floor as he trotted to the bathroom, returning moments later with Marcus's prescription bottle clutched. Carefully in his mouth, the pup placed it precisely in Marcus's outstretched hand, then sat, waiting for approval. "Good boy," Marcus praised, offering a small treat from his pocket. To Emma, he added, "He knows the names of over 30 different items now. He can differentiate between my regular medications and the emergency ones. How many service dogs can do that at his age?" Emma's voice carried a mix of amazement and concern. "It's impressive, Marcus, truly, but we have to be realistic about his development. Wolf, pups mature differently than dogs. Their instincts, their needs, they're fundamentally wild." Before Marcus could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Shadow's posture changed immediately. Marcus could feel it in the way the pup's muscles tensed under his hand. A low, warning growl rumbled in Shadow's throat, but it stopped the instant Marcus touched his head. "Come in, Sarah," Marcus called, recognizing his sister's distinctive knock. The door opened, bringing with it the scent of fresh-baked bread and Sarah's favorite lavender perfume. "I brought dinner," Sarah announced, her footsteps hesitating slightly as Shadow moved to investigate the bag she carried. "And news from the town meeting. I think you should hear." Marcus gestured toward the kitchen, and the small group moved to the familiar space where so many important conversations had taken place over the past months. Shadow followed, his movements now smooth and controlled, a far cry from the clumsy pup of weeks ago. As Sarah unpacked the food, its aromatic steam filling the kitchen, she began to share what she'd learned. The town council had debated for hours about Marcus and Shadow's situation. While the initial permits had been granted for rehabilitation purposes, the growing bond between man and wolf had sparked both admiration and concern. "They're sending a wildlife specialist next week," Sarah explained, her voice tight with worry. "Someone from the State Conservation Department. They want to evaluate whether—" She paused, and Marcus could picture her glancing at Shadow, who had settled at his feet. "Whether this arrangement can continue." The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft sounds of Shadow's breathing and the distant call of birds outside the window. Marcus absorbed the news, his fingers absently stroking Shadow's fur, feeling the steady rhythm of the wolf's heartbeat against his leg. "Then we'll show them," Marcus said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "We'll show them that trust can bridge any gap, that understanding can overcome fear." The weeks that followed tested that conviction in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. The wildlife specialist, Dr. James Morrison, arrived with a team of observers and a long list of assessments. They watched as Marcus and Shadow demonstrated their daily routines, documented their training sessions, and measured every aspect of their interaction. Through it all, Shadow's behavior continued to defy expectations. The wolf pup, now nearly 6 months old, showed none of the aggressive tendencies the experts had feared. Instead, he displayed an almost supernatural awareness of Marcus's needs, anticipating potential hazards and responding to commands with an intelligence that surprised even the skeptics. One morning, as Marcus worked in his herb garden with Shadow, by his side, he overheard Dr. Morrison speaking quietly to Emma. "I've never seen anything like it," the specialist admitted. "The level of cooperation, the bond between them, it challenges everything we thought we knew about wolf behavior." But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As Shadow grew, so did his strength and energy. The daily runs through the forest became longer, more vigorous. Marcus learned to trust shadows. Guidance completely as they navigated fallen logs and hidden streams, the wolf's superior senses complementing Marcus's other abilities in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Yet there were moments when Shadow's wild nature surfaced, reminding everyone that no amount of training could completely erase his true identity. The first time Shadow howled at the moon, the sound echoing through the valley, half the town called Sheriff Parker in panic. When a deer wandered too close to the property, Shadow's predatory instincts kicked in, though he stopped instantly. At Marcus's command, these incidents, rather than undermining their case, seemed to strengthen it. Shadow was demonstrating that wildness and domestication could coexist, that trust could temper instinct without destroying it. Old Jack Turner, who had become a regular visitor and unofficial advocate for Marcus and Shadow, put it best during one of the council meetings. "What we're seeing here isn't just about a man and a wolf," he declared, his weathered voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "It's about our relationship with the wild itself. Maybe instead of trying to control nature, we should be learning to understand it." As autumn approached, bringing with it the first hints of winter's chill, Marcus and Shadow's story began to attract attention beyond Pine Valley. Journalists called, requesting interviews. Wildlife photographers appeared at the edge of the property, hoping to capture images of the unlikely pair. Through it all, Marcus maintained his focus on what mattered most, his growing partnership with Shadow. The wolf, now approaching adolescence, had developed a protective streak that went beyond mere training. He seemed to sense Marcus's moods, offering comfort during the dark nights when memories of war haunted his dreams, providing playful distraction when anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. One crisp morning, as frost crunched under their feet during their dawn walk, Marcus realized something profound. In trying to save Shadow, he had found salvation himself. The wolf's presence had given him more than just practical assistance. It had restored his sense of purpose, his connection to the world around him. But as winter approached, bringing with it new challenges and the promise of change, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest test still lay ahead. Shadow was growing stronger every day, his howls carrying further into the wilderness, where other wolves might be roaming. The true measure of their bond would come when nature called to Shadow's wild heart, when the pull of his inherent identity tested the strength of the trust they had built. For now, though, Marcus focused on the present. The feel of Shadow's fur under his fingers, the sound of the wolf's steady breathing, the way their movements had become synchronized through months of learning each other's rhythms. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, two souls who had found in each other the healing they both needed. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Pine Valley, Marcus and Shadow sat on their porch, listening to the evening sounds of the forest. The wolf's head rested on Marcus's knee, a gesture of trust and affection that spoke louder than words. In the distance, an owl called and Shadow's ears twitched, but he remained still, choosing to stay by his human companion's side. The night air carried the promise of snow, and with it the whispers of changes to come. But for now, in this moment of perfect understanding between man and wolf, everything was exactly as it should be. The first heavy snow of winter blanketed Pine Valley in pristine white, transforming the landscape into a hushed wonderland. Inside Marcus's cabin, the crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows as Shadow, now nearly full-grown, paced restlessly by the window. His massive frame had filled out impressively, bearing little resemblance to the fragile pup Marcus had rescued months ago. The wolf's shoulders now reached Marcus's hip, and his presence filled the room with an undeniable wild energy. The change in seasons had brought new challenges. Shadow's behavior had begun to shift subtly as winter tightened its grip on the valley. His howls carried a different tone, filled with questions that only the wilderness could answer. During their morning walks, he would pause more frequently, nose lifted to the wind, catching scents that Marcus could only imagine. Dr. Emma Roberts noticed the changes during her weekly visits. "His testosterone levels are rising," she explained one morning, after completing Shadow's latest health check. "He's reaching sexual maturity. We need to be prepared for what that might mean." Marcus ran his hand along Shadow's back, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the thick winter coat. "He's restless," he admitted, "especially at night. Sometimes I hear him by the bedroom window, making sounds I've never heard before." Emma's pen scratched against her notepad. "There have been reports," she said carefully, "of wolf activity in the national forest. A pack might be moving through the area." She paused, and Marcus could sense her studying him. "Marcus, we need to discuss the possibility that Shadow might try to answer their calls." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shadow's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, accompanied by angry voices. Marcus recognized Sheriff Tom Parker's steady stride among them. "Marcus!" Tom called, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to talk. There's been an incident." Shadow moved to Marcus's side. As he opened the door, the wolf's body tense but controlled. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of multiple people and something else: fear. 3 sheep were killed last night at the Henderson farm, Tom explained without preamble. "Bob Henderson and half the town council are here. They want to know where Shadow was." Marcus's heart sank. He knew this moment would come eventually. The first time Shadow would be suspected of giving in to his wild nature. "Shadow was here all night," he said firmly. "He sleeps in my room. I would have known if he'd left." "Can you be certain?" a harsh voice demanded. Bob Henderson, his words sharp with accusation. "How can a blind man know for sure what a wolf does in the dark?" Shadow growled softly, but remained steady under Marcus's hand. Emma stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of professional authority. "Shadow's movements are tracked," she stated. "He wears a GPS collar that logs his location every 15 minutes. We can verify exactly where he was last night." The tension in the air shifted slightly. Marcus heard mutters from the gathered crowd as Emma pulled out her tablet and began accessing the tracking data. Shadow pressed closer to his side, as if understanding the importance of staying calm. "According to the logs," Emma announced, "Shadow never left the property last night. In fact, he hasn't left Marcus's immediate vicinity in the past 24 hours. She paused, then added, "The kill patterns at the Henderson farm should also tell us what we're dealing with. A single wolf wouldn't typically take down 3 sheep in one night. This sounds more like pack behavior." The revelation sent a ripple through the crowd. Marcus could hear them shifting in the snow, their angry certainty giving way to uncertainty. Sheriff Parker cleared his throat. "Bob, I think we need to consider the possibility that we've got wild wolves in the area. I'll send a team to check the attack site for tracks and other evidence." As the crowd gradually dispersed, their footsteps fading into the winter morning, Marcus felt a deep gratitude for Emma's foresight in implementing the tracking system. But beneath that relief lay a growing concern. If a wolf pack was indeed moving through the area, how would Shadow react to their presence? The answer began to reveal itself in the days that followed. Shadow's behavior became increasingly complex, a dance between his trained responses and his awakening instincts. During the day, he remained Marcus's devoted companion, guiding him through their routines with unwavering attention. But at night, his howls took on a new urgency, sometimes drawing distant responses from the wilderness. Old Jack Turner, who had become something of a mentor to Marcus in understanding wild behaviors, shared his observations during one of his frequent visits. "The pack's getting closer," he said, warming his hands by the fire as Shadow lay alert by the window. They're curious about him. Natural, really. He's one of their kind, but he moves between their world and ours. Marcus nodded, listening to Shadow's steady breathing. Do you think they'll try to draw him away? Jack was silent for a long moment, the fire popping softly in the background. Nature has its own pull, he finally said. But so does love. The question isn't whether they'll call to him. They already are. The question is what he'll choose. The old man's words proved prophetic. As January deepened into February, the wild pack drew steadily closer to Pine Valley. Their howls could be heard most nights now, echoing off the mountainsides. Shadow's responses became more frequent, though he never attempted to break free of the property's boundaries. The situation came to a head one frigid night when the temperature plunged well below zero. Marcus was awakened by Shadow's unusual behavior. The wolf was pacing frantically between the bedroom window and the door, emitting soft whines of distress. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, reaching for his coat. Shadow's claws clicked rapidly across the floor as he led Marcus to the front door. The moment it opened, the night air carried the sound of distant yelping, not the usual howls of the wild pack, but sounds of distress. Shadow's muscles trembled under Marcus's hand, torn between his protective instincts toward his human companion and the clear call for help from his own kind. Making a quick decision, Marcus grabbed his emergency pack and thick winter gear. "Okay, Shadow," he said firmly, "show me." The wolf led him into the night, moving carefully to accommodate Marcus's pace through the deep snow. They had practiced night navigation countless times, but this was different. Shadow's urgency was palpable, yet he never rushed ahead or pulled too hard on the lead. The distress calls led them deep into the forest, well beyond their usual patrol route. Marcus trusted Shadow completely, following his guidance around obstacles and over rough terrain. After what seemed like hours, they found the source of the cries. Shadow's behavior changed instantly. His body tensed, and a low whine escaped his throat. The sounds of movement in the snow told Marcus they had found members of the wild pack, but something was wrong. Emma's voice suddenly cut through the darkness. She must have followed them after receiving an alert from Shadow's tracking collar. "It's 2 young wolves," she reported quietly. "They've fallen through some thin ice into a creek bed. They're trapped, hypothermic. The rest of the pack is nearby, but they can't help them." What happened next demonstrated the true depth of Shadow's transformation. Under Marcus's calm direction, the wolf helped coordinate a rescue effort that bridged the gap between human and wild. Shadow's presence kept the pack at bay, while Emma and Marcus worked to free the trapped wolves, his occasional soft growls communicating reassurance to both sides. The operation took hours, testing the limits of their endurance in the brutal cold. By dawn, the young wolves were freed, treated for exposure, and reunited with their pack. Throughout the ordeal, Shadow never once showed aggression toward the wild wolves, nor did he attempt to join them. Instead, he maintained his position as a guardian of both worlds, a bridge between the wild and the tame. As they made their way back to the cabin, exhausted but triumphant, Marcus realized that Shadow had made his choice long ago. The wolf had found his true purpose not in returning to the wild, but in becoming something entirely new, a creature who could honor both his natural instincts and his chosen bonds. The rescue marked a turning point in Pine Valley's acceptance of Shadow. The story spread quickly through the town, transformed in the telling from a potential crisis into a testament to the extraordinary partnership between man and wolf. Even Bob Henderson, who had been one of their strongest critics, had to admit that Shadow's presence might have prevented a tragedy. The wild pack remained in the area, establishing a territory in the national forest beyond Pine Valley. Their howls became a regular part of the night music, but they no longer caused the same stir of panic in town. Shadow would answer their calls, but his replies now carried a different message, not a longing to return, but a greeting between different paths chosen. Spring began to hint at its arrival, bringing with it new challenges and possibilities. Shadow's first year of life had transformed not only the wolf, but the entire community's understanding of what was possible when trust overcame fear. The GPS collar around his neck no longer felt like a necessity for proving his whereabouts. It had become simply another tool in their unique partnership, like Marcus's cane or the specialized harness they used for their more adventurous expeditions. Emma's regular checkups became more like friendly visits, though she maintained her professional documentation of Shadow's unprecedented development. "He's creating his own category," she remarked during one session. "Not quite wild, not quite tame, but something entirely new." Marcus understood what she meant. Shadow had grown into a creature that defied easy classification. He could still track a deer through the forest with all the skill of his wild cousins, but he chose to return home. He could howl with the power of a wild wolf, but he also understood dozens of human commands. He was gentle enough to help Marcus tend his herb garden, yet strong enough to deter any threat to his human family. The bond between them had deepened beyond what anyone could have predicted. Shadow didn't just assist Marcus, he anticipated his needs, adapted to his moods, and provided a kind of companionship that transcended the usual boundaries between species. Together, they had created something that neither could have achieved alone, a bridge between two worlds, built on trust, respect, and an unwavering commitment to understanding each other. As winter's grip began to loosen its hold on Pine Valley, Marcus and Shadow's story continued to evolve, proving that the greatest transformations often come not from changing what we are, but from embracing all that we can become. Spring painted Pine Valley in vibrant hues, transforming the landscape with fresh growth and renewed energy. Marcus sat on his porch, listening to the symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves, while Shadow patrolled the perimeter of their property. The wolf's movements had taken on a new vigilance lately, sparked by changes neither of them fully understood yet. The morning peace shattered as Shadow's warning growl cut through the air. Marcus straightened, recognizing the different pitch. That meant unfamiliar visitors. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path, multiple people moving with purpose. "Mr. Anderson?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "I'm Catherine Walsh from the State Wildlife Research Institute. We've been monitoring your situation with great interest." Marcus rose, feeling Shadow return to his side. "I wasn't aware. We were being monitored," he replied carefully, his hand finding its familiar place on Shadow's back. "That's rather the point," Catherine said. "We needed unbiased data. Your work with this wolf has attracted significant attention in the scientific community. We're here to propose something unprecedented." The subsequent conversation in Marcus's living room would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their journey. Catherine and her team had been studying Shadow's development and his unique relationship with Marcus for months. They believed this partnership could provide invaluable insights into wolf behavior and human-wildlife interaction. "We want to establish a research program," Catherine explained, her excitement barely contained. "Using your experience as a foundation, we could explore new approaches to wildlife conservation and rehabilitation. But it would mean significant changes." Emma Roberts, who had arrived shortly after receiving Marcus's text, asked the critical questions. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" Catherine's proposal unfolded like a double-edged sword. The Institute would provide funding, resources, and official recognition of their work. They would build proper facilities on Marcus's property, expanding it into a small research center. But it would also mean increased scrutiny, regular testing, and turning their private sanctuary into something more public. "Shadow isn't a research subject," Marcus said firmly, feeling the wolf's steady presence against his leg. "He's family. We understand that, Catherine assured him. That's precisely why this is so valuable. You've achieved something remarkable. Here, Mr. Anderson, think of how many other animals could benefit from what we learn. Think of the possibilities for conservation. The proposal sparked intense debate within the Pine Valley community. The town council called an emergency meeting to discuss the implications. Sheriff Tom Parker voiced concerns about increased traffic and potential risks. Old Jack Turner, ever the voice of wisdom, reminded everyone that progress often required stepping into unknown territory. Marcus found himself at the center of a storm of opinions and expectations. Some saw the research program as an opportunity for Pine Valley to become a leader in wildlife conservation. Others worried it would disrupt the delicate balance they'd achieved. Through it all, Shadow remained his anchor, his behavior unchanging despite the chaos swirling around them. Late one evening, as Marcus sat by the fire wrestling with the decision, Sarah arrived with dinner and her usual straight talk. "You're not sleeping," she observed, setting down containers that filled the air with the scent of her signature stew. "Shadow isn't either. I can see it in both of you." Marcus sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "How can I turn this into a circus? Subject him to endless tests and observations. He's not a specimen in a lab." Shadow moved from his spot by the window, placing his head on Marcus's knee. The gesture, so familiar now, carried its own kind of wisdom. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "Remember what you told me when you first found him? That sometimes trust means taking risks?" The memory struck a chord. Those early days had been full of uncertainty, yet they'd forged ahead, building something extraordinary through patience and mutual trust. Perhaps this was another such moment. The decision, when it came, was accompanied by conditions. Marcus would accept the Institute's proposal, but on his terms. Shadow's welfare would remain paramount. Any research would be conducted with minimal disruption to their established routines. Most importantly, they would maintain control over how their story was shared with the world. Spring melted into summer as the changes began. The Institute's architects designed additions to Marcus's property that blended naturally with the landscape. Local contractors, now comfortable with Shadow's presence, worked under the wolf's watchful eye to build new facilities. Through it all, Marcus and Shadow maintained their daily routines, their bond a constant in the midst of transformation. The first challenge came with the arrival of the research team. Dr. James Chen, a behavioral specialist, wanted to conduct a series of tests to measure Shadow's cognitive abilities. The wolf's resistance was subtle but clear. He performed the tasks perfectly, but with a reluctance that only Marcus could fully perceive. "He's not giving you his best," Marcus explained after one particularly frustrating session. "Shadow understands more than you're testing for, but he doesn't see the point of these exercises." Dr. Chen's skepticism was evident in his voice. "Mr. Anderson, while I respect your connection with the subject, we need quantifiable data." "Then quantify what matters," Marcus countered. "Don't test him like a lab animal. Watch how he solves real problems, how he adapts to genuine challenges." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a severe summer storm. The research team had stayed late, analyzing data, when a flash flood warning was issued for Pine Valley. As the storm intensified, Shadow's behavior changed dramatically. He began moving between the humans present, herding them away from the windows and toward the center of the building. Minutes later, a massive lightning strike hit a tree near the property line, sending it crashing through the exact spot where Dr. Chen had been working. Shadow's preventive evacuation had potentially saved lives. More importantly, it demonstrated a level of cognitive processing and decision-making that no controlled test could have revealed. The incident marked a turning point in the research approach. Instead of trying to force Shadow into standardized tests, the team began documenting his natural behaviors and problem-solving abilities. They observed how he adapted his guiding techniques based on terrain and weather conditions, how he communicated different types of threats to Marcus, and how he modulated his strength and speed to match his human companion's needs. Catherine Walsh returned during this period, bringing with her news that would further complicate their situation. "We've identified Shadow's original pack," she announced during a team meeting. "They've established a permanent territory about 50 miles north. Based on genetic markers from scat samples, we believe Shadow's mother is still with them." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Shadow, sensing his distress, pressed closer to his side. The implications were clear. They now had the ability to potentially reunite Shadow with his birth family. The question was whether they should. "He should have the choice," Marcus said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't make this decision for him." The plan they developed was careful and methodical. They would gradually introduce Shadow to his family's scent markers, observe his reactions, and potentially arrange a controlled meeting if he showed interest. The research team saw it as an unprecedented opportunity to study wolf family recognition and bonding. Marcus saw it as potentially losing his closest companion. Summer days stretched long as they began the process. Shadow's reactions to his birth pack's scent were complex. Interest mixed with uncertainty. He would spend long moments investigating the markers, then return to Marcus with an almost apologetic demeanor, as if torn between two worlds. The situation grew more complicated when trail cameras captured images of wolves from Shadow's birth pack approaching closer to Pine Valley than ever before. They seemed drawn by his presence, perhaps recognizing his scent from the wind. The town's residents watched the developments with a mixture of fascination and concern. Old Jack Turner, observing Shadow's behavior during this period, offered his perspective one evening. "You know what's remarkable?" he said, watching the wolf move restlessly between the window and Marcus's chair. "He's not just choosing between wild and tame. He's creating something entirely new." Marcus understood what Jack meant. Shadow's responses to his birth pack weren't those of a domesticated animal yearning for freedom, nor of a wild creature restraining its true nature. Instead, he seemed to be forging his own path, one that honored both his wild heritage and his chosen family. The research team documented every aspect of this process, their initial skepticism giving way to genuine amazement. Shadow's ability to navigate between these different worlds, to make conscious choices about his interactions and relationships, challenged their preconceptions about wolf behavior and animal consciousness. Late one night, as Marcus sat on his porch listening to distant wolf howls, he felt Shadow's warm presence beside him. The wolf's own voice lifted in response, but his song was different now. Not a call of longing or separation, but a bridge between worlds. His head rested on Marcus's knee, a gesture that spoke more eloquently than any scientific data could measure. Dr. Chen, who had stayed late to observe this interaction, finally began to understand what Marcus had been trying to tell them. "We've been looking at this all wrong," he admitted quietly. "The real story isn't about domesticating a wolf or studying cognitive behaviors. It's about the capacity for connection across seemingly impossible boundaries." As summer began to wane, bringing with it hints of autumn's approach, Marcus and Shadow's partnership continued to evolve. The research program, modified to respect their unique bond, began yielding insights that would influence wildlife conservation practices across the country. But more importantly, it demonstrated that the most profound discoveries often come not from controlling nature, but from learning to listen to it with an open heart. Autumn painted Pine Valley in rich amber and gold, the crisp mountain air carrying whispers of change. Marcus walked along the forest trail, Shadow's warm presence guiding him through the morning mist. The wolf moved with practiced grace, yet there was an underlying tension in his movements that Marcus had learned to recognize over their time together. The source of Shadow's unease became clear as they approached the research center's new observation post. Voices drifted through the trees, unfamiliar ones, speaking in excited whispers. Shadow's muscles tensed beneath Marcus's hand, a low rumble building in his throat. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, feeling the wolf's immediate response to his voice. The rumble subsided, but Shadow's alertness remained heightened. "Mr. Anderson," a man's voice called out, laden with an accent that spoke of Eastern universities and city life. "I'm Professor Richard Maxwell from the National Wildlife Federation. We've been extremely eager to meet you both." The ensuing conversation revealed why Shadow had been so alert. The Federation, it seemed, had greater plans for their research program. Professor Maxwell spoke enthusiastically about expanded facilities, increased funding, and, most concerning, the potential to bring in other wolves for rehabilitation. "Think of the possibilities," Maxwell urged, his voice rising with excitement. "We could create an entire program based on your methods. Shadow could be the key to revolutionizing how we approach wolf rehabilitation across the country." Marcus felt Shadow press closer to his side, sensing his companion's discomfort with the stranger's intensity. "Shadow isn't a method," he replied, carefully. "What we have here is unique. It can't be mass-produced." The professor's enthusiasm didn't waver. Of course, but surely you see the potential. The Federation is prepared to commit significant resources. We're talking about a full-scale wildlife rehabilitation center, with you and Shadow as its cornerstone." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the research center. Dr. Emma Roberts' voice cut through the chaos, sharp with urgency. "Marcus, we need you and Shadow at the main building, now." The tension in Emma's voice spurred them into immediate action. Shadow led Marcus along the familiar path, their pace quick but measured. As they approached, the sounds of distress became clearer, frightened voices, the shuffle of many feet, and beneath it all, a sound that made Shadow's ears prick forward, the whimpers of a young wolf. "What's happening?" Marcus asked as they reached the building. Emma's voice was tight with concern. "The state rangers found an injured juvenile wolf in the national forest. They brought her here because of our facilities, but she's panic-stricken. We can't get close enough to treat her." The scared wolf's distress calls grew louder, accompanied by warning growls whenever humans tried to approach. Shadow's behavior changed instantly. His posture shifted, and a soft whine escaped his throat. "Let Shadow help," Marcus suggested, understanding his companion's intent. "He knows how to bridge this gap." The research team watched in amazement as Shadow took the lead. Under Marcus's quiet direction, the wolf approached the frightened juvenile slowly, his body language conveying calm assurance. The younger wolf's growls subsided, replaced by uncertain whimpers. What followed was a masterclass in interspecies communication. Shadow positioned himself between the injured wolf and the humans, gradually helping her understand that these people meant help, not harm. Through soft vocalizations and subtle body language, he created a space where trust could begin to grow. Dr. James Chen, who had been documenting Shadow's behaviors for months, could barely contain his excitement. "This is unprecedented," he whispered, furiously taking notes. "He's actively translating between species, creating a communication bridge we've never seen before." The rescue operation lasted hours, with Shadow remaining steadfastly present as Emma and her team treated the young wolf's injuries. Marcus stayed nearby, his quiet presence seeming to reassure both wolves. The injured juvenile, whom they named Luna, began to respond to treatment once she understood she wasn't in danger. Professor Maxwell, who had witnessed the entire event, was practically vibrating with excitement. "This changes everything," he declared. "The Federation needs to see this. We could develop an entire protocol based on using socialized wolves as intermediaries in wildlife rehabilitation." But Marcus felt uneasy about the professor's enthusiasm. Something in the way he spoke about Shadow, as if he were a tool, to be utilized, rather than a sentient being making his own choices, set off warning bells. The following days brought a stream of Federation officials and wildlife experts to Pine Valley. Each arrival seemed to carry new plans, new proposals, and new expectations. Shadow handled the increased attention with remarkable patience, but Marcus could sense his companion's growing discomfort with the constant observation and demands. The breaking point came during a demonstration for Federation board members. They had brought another injured wolf, expecting Shadow to repeat his success with Luna. But this situation was different. The new wolf was an adult male, aggressive, from pain and fear. Shadow's attempts at communication were met with hostile responses. "This isn't working," Marcus interrupted as the tension between the wolves escalated. "Shadow, come." The wolf immediately returned to his side. But the damage was done. The Federation representatives had witnessed what they saw as a failure, though Marcus understood it as something else entirely: Shadow's wisdom in knowing when not to push. Later that evening, as they sat on their porch listening to the wind, in the pines, old Jack Turner paid them a visit. The elderly man had become their most steadfast supporter, understanding things about their bond that even the scientists missed. "They're trying to turn something sacred into something mechanical," Jack observed, his weathered voice carrying years of wisdom. "Nature doesn't work that way. Neither does trust." Marcus nodded, feeling Shadow's head resting on his knee. "They want to create a program, a system that can be replicated, but what Shadow and I have, it can't be forced." The situation reached a critical point when Professor Maxwell returned with a formal proposal. The Federation wanted to establish a full-scale wolf rehabilitation center with Shadow as the cornerstone of their program. They would bring in more wolves, expand the facilities, and implement standardized protocols based on their observations of Shadow's behaviors. "This could be your legacy," Maxwell argued passionately. "Think of how many wolves could be helped, how many lives could be changed." But as Marcus listened to the grand plans and ambitious proposals, he felt Shadow's subtle shifts beside him. The wolf had always been his compass, helping him navigate not just the physical world, but the moral one as well. And right now, Shadow was telling him something important. "I understand what you're trying to achieve," Marcus said finally. "But what Shadow and I have isn't a method that can be standardized. It's a relationship built on mutual trust and respect. Each wolf, each situation is unique." The professor's frustration was evident in his voice. "But surely you see the potential. The Federation is prepared to invest millions in this project. We could make Pine Valley a center of excellence for wildlife rehabilitation." "At what cost?" Marcus asked quietly. "You're talking about turning this sanctuary into a facility, about treating each wolf as a project rather than an individual. That's not what Shadow has taught me." The debate extended beyond their property lines. The town council convened emergency meetings to discuss the Federation's proposals. Some saw it as an unprecedented opportunity for Pine Valley's growth and recognition. Others, led by old Jack, argued for protecting the unique and sacred nature of what Marcus and Shadow had achieved. Through it all, Shadow's behavior remained a testament to the very thing they were debating. He continued his daily routines with Marcus helped care for Luna as she recovered and maintained his role as a bridge between the wild and human worlds. But he did so in his own way, on his own terms, demonstrating that true understanding couldn't be forced into a standardized protocol. One morning, as Marcus and Shadow walked their familiar trail, they encountered Luna near the property boundary. The young wolf had healed well and would soon be ready for release. Shadow approached her with his usual gentle authority, but something was different in their interaction. "They're saying goodbye," Emma observed softly, having joined them for the morning rounds. "Luna's strong enough now. She's ready to return to the wild." Marcus listened to the soft vocalizations between the wolves, understanding that this moment embodied everything he had been trying to explain to the Federation. Luna had healed not because of any protocol or program, but because Shadow had shown her how to trust while maintaining her wild nature. The young wolf's release was a quiet affair, attended only by those who had been directly involved in her care. As Luna disappeared into the forest, her departure carried a powerful message about the true nature of rehabilitation. It wasn't about changing wild animals to fit human expectations, but about helping them find their own path to healing. Professor Maxwell and the Federation eventually revised their proposals, accepting that their original vision needed to change. Instead of trying to standardize Shadow's abilities, they began to focus on understanding the principles behind his success. The importance of individual relationships, the need for patience, and the recognition that each animal's journey was unique. As autumn deepened toward winter, Pine Valley settled into a new rhythm. The research center continued its work, but with a different focus. Rather than trying to create a repeatable system, they concentrated on documenting and understanding the subtle dynamics of trust between species. Shadow, free from the pressure of constant demonstrations, returned to his natural role as Marcus's companion and bridge between worlds. His success with Luna became not a template to be copied, but a story to inspire a more thoughtful approach to wildlife rehabilitation. The experience had taught them all something profound about the nature of trust and healing. True rehabilitation, like true friendship, couldn't be reduced to a formula or forced into a standardized program. It had to grow naturally, built on respect, understanding, and the recognition that each being, human or wolf, had its own unique path to follow. The first frost of late autumn crystallized on the windows of Marcus's cabin as dawn painted the sky in pale gold. Inside, shadows. Keen ears picked up a sound that made him rise from his usual spot by the fireplace, hackles slightly raised. Marcus, attuned to his companion's subtle changes, paused in his morning routine. A sharp knock at the door confirmed Shadow's alertness. Emma Roberts' voice carried through tight with urgency. "Marcus, we've got a situation developing. The state's Wildlife Commission is here." The morning unfolded into what would become one of their greatest challenges yet. In the main room of the research center, Marcus sat with Shadow at his side, listening to Director Patricia Morgan outline a situation that threatened everything they had built. 3 children went missing in the National Forest yesterday afternoon, Patricia explained, her voice professionally neutral but underlaid with tension. They were last seen hiking near Wolf Creek, about 15 miles north of here. Shadow's ears pricked forward at the mention of Wolf Creek. It was an area they knew well from their extended patrols. Marcus felt the wolf's muscles tense slightly. Under his hand, "The governor has authorized an emergency search operation," Patricia continued. "Given Shadow's unique abilities and your experience with the terrain, we need your help. But I have to be clear, there are those who are already suggesting that the local wolf population might be involved in the children's disappearance." The implications hung heavy in the air. If wolves were blamed for any harm to the children, it could destroy years of conservation work and community trust. Worse, It could lead to a culling order that would threaten not only the wild packs, but potentially Shadow's status as well. Marcus straightened in his chair. When do we start? The search operation mobilized quickly, with Shadow and Marcus joining the first response team. The wolf's behavior shifted seamlessly into search mode, a skill they had developed during their years together but had never tested on this scale. Sheriff Tom Parker coordinated with the state rescue teams, setting up a command center at the trailhead. The autumn air was crisp and clear, carrying scents that Shadow could track with remarkable precision. Marcus relied completely on his companion's guidance as they moved through the forest, their years of trust and training now serving a crucial purpose. The first few hours proved challenging, the children's trail mixed with dozens of other scents. Searchers, wildlife, the lingering traces of other hikers. But Shadow worked methodically, his powerful nose sorting through the layers of information that humans could never detect. Old Jack Turner, despite his age, joined the operation, offering his deep knowledge of the area's hidden caves and shelters. Kids often seek familiar places when they're lost, he explained, as they paused to let Shadow investigate a promising scent. There's an old ranger cabin about 2 miles up. Used to be a popular spot for local youngsters. The mention of the cabin triggered something in Shadow's behavior. His body language changed, becoming more focused, more urgent. Marcus felt the shift through the harness they used for difficult terrain. He's got something, Marcus announced to the team. Shadow, show us. The wolf led them up a barely discernible trail, his pace quick but careful enough for Marcus to follow safely. The sound of running water grew stronger. They were approaching one of the creek's tributaries. Suddenly, Shadow stopped, letting out a soft whine that Marcus had learned meant caution was needed. Emma, who had been documenting Shadow's search patterns, moved closer. "There's a steep ravine ahead," she reported quietly. "And wait, I see something." Fabric caught on a branch. The discovery energized the search team. Shadow's behavior became more intense, his movements showing he wanted to descend the ravine. But the terrain was treacherous, especially for a blind man and a wolf connected by a harness. Marcus made a quick decision. Shadow, find them, go. For the first time in their partnership, Marcus unclipped Shadow's harness, freeing him to move independently. The wolf hesitated for just a moment, pressing against Marcus's leg, as if confirming this was what he wanted, then moved swiftly down. The ravine. The waiting was excruciating. Marcus stood listening intently, tracking Shadow's progress through the sounds of his movement. Then, echoing up from below, came the sound they had been praying for, children's voices, followed by Shadow's distinctive bark that meant he had found something important. The rescue team mobilized immediately, using ropes and climbing gear to reach the spot Shadow had identified. The 3 children, cold and scared but otherwise unharmed, had indeed tried to reach the old ranger cabin, but had become disoriented. In the growing darkness, they had sought shelter in a small cave near the creek bed, huddling together through the night. What happened next would become part of Pine Valley legend. As the rescue team worked to safely extract the children, a new sound echoed through the ravine, wolf howls much closer than anyone expected. The wild pack that roamed this territory had drawn near, attracted by Shadow's presence and the unusual activity. The rescue team tensed, worried about managing both an evacuation and potential wolf encounters. But Shadow, standing guard near the cave entrance, responded to the howls with a series of vocalizations that Marcus had never heard before. The wild wolves remained at a distance, neither approaching nor retreating, as if honoring some boundary that Shadow had established. "He's keeping them informed," Old Jack observed softly, "letting them know this is a rescue, not a threat." The children, once safely pulled from the ravine, revealed something remarkable. During their frightening night alone, they had been visited by wolves from the wild pack. But rather than feeling threatened, They described how the wolves had seemed to stand guard, occasionally checking on them through the night. They were like Shadow, the oldest child explained, wrapped in an emergency blanket. They knew we were scared and wanted to help. The revelation sent ripples through the wildlife research community. Dr. James Chen, reviewing the incident reports, could barely contain his excitement. This suggests a level of interspecies empathy we've barely begun to understand. The wild pack recognized these children needed protection, and Shadow somehow mediated between all parties involved. The successful rescue transformed the narrative around wolves in Pine Valley and beyond. Instead of fear and suspicion, the media carried stories of natural cooperation and intelligence. Shadow's role as a bridge between wild and human worlds had never been more clearly demonstrated. The State Wildlife Commission, led by Director Morgan, used the incident to strengthen wolf conservation efforts. What we witnessed today wasn't just a successful search and rescue, she announced at a press conference. It was a powerful reminder that when we take the time to understand and work with nature rather than against it, extraordinary things are possible. Back at the cabin, as the excitement of the rescue gradually settled, Marcus sat with Shadow by the fireplace, reflecting on how far they had come. The wolf's head rested on his knee, a position of trust that had become as natural as breathing. "You did more than find those children today," Marcus said softly, running his fingers through Shadow's thick fur. "You showed everyone what I've always known, that the line between wild and tame isn't as clear as we think." Shadow's response was a gentle sigh, his body relaxed but alert as always. The wolf had demonstrated something profound about his nature. He could work within human structures, follow commands, and help achieve human goals, but he never lost touch with his wild instincts. Instead, he had learned to bridge both worlds, using each aspect of his nature when it was most needed. The rescue operation had lasting effects on the research program and the community's relationship with its wild neighbors. The children's story of being watched over by wolves sparked a renewed interest in understanding wolf behavior and intelligence. Dr. Chen and his team began documenting similar instances of wolves showing protective behaviors toward humans in distress, suggesting that Shadow's capacity for empathy might not be as unique as they had thought. Emma Roberts, who had been with them since the beginning, perhaps summarized it best in her research notes. "What we're learning from Shadow isn't just about wolf behavior or animal training. It's about the possibility that exists when we approach the natural world with respect and openness to understanding. Every day, he shows us that the greatest discoveries come not from trying to control nature, but from learning to work in harmony with it." As autumn deepened and the forest prepared for winter's approach, Marcus and Shadow's partnership continued to evolve. Each challenge they faced seemed to reveal new depths to their understanding of each other and the delicate balance between wild and tame. The rescue had proven that their unique bond could serve a greater purpose, bridging not just the gap between species, but between different ways of seeing and understanding the world. The sound of distant wolf howls often filled the night air. But they no longer carried notes of longing or separation. Instead, they seemed to speak of connection, of boundaries respected and bridges built. Shadow would answer these calls in his own voice, neither fully wild nor fully tame, but something uniquely his own. A voice that spoke of the possibility that existed when trust transcended the boundaries humans had drawn between themselves and the natural world. Winter descended on Pine Valley with unexpected ferocity, bringing the heaviest snowfall in decades. Marcus stood at his cabin window, feeling the cold radiating through the glass, while Shadow paced restlessly behind him. The wolf's behavior had been different lately, marked by an alertness that spoke of approaching danger. The morning quiet shattered as Sarah's car skidded into the driveway, her tires crunching urgently on the frozen ground. Shadow was at the door before she knocked, his posture tense but controlled. "Marcus, turn on the radio," Sarah called through the door, her voice tight with worry. "There's been an accident on Mountain Pass Road. A tourist bus slid off the highway during the storm. They're calling for emergency volunteers with local knowledge." The news broadcasts painted a grim picture. 17 passengers trapped in treacherous terrain, with conventional rescue vehicles unable to reach them through the deepening snow. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and forecasts predicted another storm front approaching within hours. Sheriff Tom Parker arrived minutes later, his patrol car's chains rattling against the ice. "Marcus, we need you and Shadow. The bus went off the road near Wolf's Ridge. That's your territory." Wolf's Ridge was a treacherous section of mountain road that Marcus and Shadow knew intimately from their daily patrols. The ridge's name came from its history as a wolf migration route, something Shadow had demonstrated through his own behavior. During their explorations, the emergency response team gathered at the ranger station where Dr. Emma Roberts was already setting up a medical triage area. Old Jack Turner arrived with his ancient but reliable snowmobile, loaded with emergency supplies. "The biggest challenge isn't just reaching them," Tom explained during the briefing. "It's finding a safe route to bring them out. The whole hillside's unstable from the heavy snow." Marcus felt Shadow press against his leg, the wolf's body radiating tension and readiness. They had trained for search and rescue, but never under such extreme conditions. The stakes had never been higher. The rescue operation mobilized in stages. The first team, led by rangers with climbing gear, would attempt to reach the bus from above. Marcus and Shadow would work with a second team, trying to find a safer route through the network of old logging trails they had mapped during their patrols. As they prepared to move out, Dr. James Chen approached with an unexpected piece of equipment. "We've modified Shadow's tracking collar," he explained, attaching the new device. "It now includes a thermal imaging relay. Through his eyes, we might be able to spot heat signatures in the snow." The technology was experimental, but they needed every advantage they could get. The storm was intensifying, reducing visibility to mere feet. Shadow led their team through the whiteout conditions, his powerful sense of smell and intimate knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. The wolf moved with certainty, choosing paths that Marcus could navigate safely despite his blindness. The research team had often marveled at their synchronized movements, but today their bond would be tested as never before. 3 hours into the search, Shadow's behavior changed dramatically. He stopped, ears forward, body rigid with attention. Through the howling wind came a sound that made everyone's blood run cold, the deep rumble of moving snow. "Avalanche!" someone shouted. Shadow was already moving, pulling Marcus urgently in a different direction. The rest of the team followed without question, trusting the wolf's instincts. Moments later, a wall of snow crashed through their original position. The near miss underscored the danger they faced, but it also revealed something crucial. Shadow's reaction had come several seconds before any human could detect the danger. His sensitivity to vibrations and subtle changes in the environment could mean the difference between life and death. The discovery of the bus came through an unexpected channel. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, responding to sounds that only he could hear. The wolf's answering howl echoed across the mountainside, and to everyone's amazement, a faint human whistle responded. The bus had slid nearly 300 feet off the road, coming to rest in a precarious position against a cluster of trees. The passengers, though cold and frightened, had managed to stay together inside the vehicle. But their situation was deteriorating rapidly as temperatures continued to fall. Traditional rescue methods would take too long. The unstable slope made helicopter evacuation impossible, and the approaching storm would soon make the entire area inaccessible. They needed an alternative, and they needed it fast. The solution came from an unlikely source. Shadow began moving purposefully along the ridge, stopping occasionally to ensure Marcus and the rescue team were following. The wolf was taking them to one of the hidden caves they had discovered during their explorations, a shelter large enough to house the passengers temporarily. The cave network connects to the old mining access road on the other side of the ridge, Marcus explained as they assessed the option. Shadow and I have mapped most of the main tunnels. It's not ideal, but it might be their best chance. The evacuation would be challenging. The cave entrance was easier to reach than the bus's location, but moving 17 cold and possibly injured people through underground tunnels would require perfect coordination and timing. Shadow's role proved crucial in ways no one had anticipated. The wolf seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, working tirelessly to help establish a safe route between the bus and the cave. More surprisingly, his presence had a calming effect on the passengers, many of whom were nearly hysterical with fear. "It's like he's telling them it's going to be okay," one of the rescued passengers later reported. Something about seeing this huge wolf working so carefully with his blind handler. It gave us hope when we needed it most. The evacuation took nearly 6 hours. Shadow made countless trips between the bus and the cave, sometimes guiding small groups, other times leading rescue workers with supplies. His endurance seemed limitless, his focus unwavering, but the real test came during the final phase of the rescue. As the last group prepared to move through the cave system, the mountain groaned ominously. Shadow's reaction was immediate and intense. The wolf planted himself firmly in front of Marcus and the remaining rescue workers, refusing to let them proceed along their planned route. Trusting Shadow's instincts had saved lives before. They quickly revised their exit strategy, taking a longer but presumably safer path through the cave network. Minutes later, they heard the muffled roar of another avalanche passing over their original route. The successful evacuation of all 17 passengers was hailed as a miracle by the media, but those who witnessed it firsthand knew it was something else. It was the result of an extraordinary partnership between a man who had learned to see through his other senses and a wolf who had learned to bridge the gap between wild instinct and human need. The incident transformed the research program's understanding of wolf intelligence and adaptability. Dr. Chen's team had captured hours of footage showing Shadow making complex decisions, anticipating problems, and actively working to protect both his human companions and the strangers in his care. "What we observed goes beyond trained behavior," Dr. Chen reported in his preliminary findings. Shadow demonstrated contextual problem-solving and risk assessment at a level we've never documented in canids. More importantly, he showed a clear understanding of human vulnerability and an active desire to mitigate it. In the days following the rescue, as Pine Valley slowly dug itself out from the historic snowfall, Marcus noticed subtle changes in Shadow's behavior. The wolf seemed more protective, more attuned to potential threats in their environment. It was as if the experience had awakened something primal in him, not the savage nature that people often feared in wolves, but an ancient instinct to guard and protect. Emma Roberts, during one of her regular checkups, observed this change with interest. "He's integrating his experiences," she suggested, watching Shadow methodically patrol the cabin's perimeter. "Combining his natural instincts with what he's learned about human needs, it's like he's creating his own role, neither purely wild nor domestic." The winter storm that had triggered the crisis eventually passed, but its effects lingered in transformed perspectives and deepened understandings. The rescued passengers, many of whom had previously feared wolves, became passionate advocates for wolf conservation. Their stories of Shadow's role in their rescue spread far beyond Pine Valley, challenging long-held prejudices about wolves' nature. Local attitudes shifted too. The same ranchers who had once viewed wolves as threats now spoke of them with newfound respect. Shadow's actions had demonstrated that wildness and compassion weren't mutually exclusive, that nature's power could be harnessed not through domination, but through partnership and understanding. As winter maintained its grip on Pine Valley, Marcus and Shadow settled into a new rhythm. Their daily patrols now included regular checks of the mountain passes, their unique partnership serving as an early warning system for potential dangers. Shadow's heightened awareness of environmental threats had made him an invaluable asset to the community's safety, proving that sometimes the best guardian was one who walked the line between two worlds. The research center documented everything, building a comprehensive study of how crisis situations could catalyze new developments in human-animal cooperation. But for Marcus, the most significant change was more personal. The rescue had deepened his trust in Shadow's judgment, reinforcing his belief that true partnership meant recognizing and respecting each other's unique gifts. Early spring brought an unexpected thaw to Pine Valley, melting the dense snowpack and awakening dormant life throughout the forest. Marcus sat on his porch, listening to the drip of melting icicles, while Shadow maintained an unusually alert posture beside him. The wolf's ears twitched constantly, tracking sounds that carried on the warming breeze. The distinctive rumble of approaching vehicles broke the morning peace, not the familiar trucks of locals, but the smooth purr of expensive engines. Shadow's muscles tensed beneath Marcus's hand as 3 cars pulled into the driveway. "Mr. Anderson?" A woman's voice, cultured and confident, called out. "I'm Victoria Blackwood from Horizon Films. We spoke on the phone last week about your story." Marcus hadn't expected them so soon. The documentary crew's arrival would change the quiet routine he and Shadow had established. The wolf's low growl reflected his own reservations about what was to come. Victoria approached the porch, her designer boots crunching on the gravel. "We brought our top crew," she continued enthusiastically. "The network is very excited about this project. Your story has all the elements we're looking for: drama, heart, the connection between human and wild." The documentary team wasted no time setting up their equipment. Camera operators positioned themselves around the property, sound technicians tested microphones, and a young man who introduced himself as Danny started sketching possible shot compositions. Dr. Emma Roberts arrived shortly after, having been notified of the film crew's presence. Her concern was evident in her voice as she pulled Marcus aside. "Are you sure about this? Shadow's never been comfortable with this much attention." Marcus understood her worry. The wolf had already retreated to the far corner of the porch, his usual confident demeanor replaced by wary observation. "They promised to follow our rules," Marcus replied. "No interference with Shadow's routines, no forced interactions." The first day of filming proved challenging. Victoria's vision for the documentary clashed with the reality of Marcus and Shadow's partnership. She wanted dramatic moments, staged interactions that would appeal to viewers. But Shadow refused to perform for the cameras, maintaining his natural behavior despite the crew's attempts to capture more exciting footage. "Could you perhaps call him to you from a distance?" Victoria suggested, frustration creeping into her voice. "We need to show the bond between you, the drama of your connection." Marcus shook his head. "Shadow isn't a trained actor. Our relationship works because it's real, not staged." The tension peaked when one of the camera operators tried to follow Shadow during his morning patrol routine. The wolf simply vanished into the forest, reappearing an hour later by Marcus's side, as if nothing had happened. Danny, the young cinematographer, proved more observant than his colleagues. "We're approaching this wrong," he told Victoria during their evening review. "The real story isn't in staged moments, it's in the subtle things, the way Shadow anticipates Marcus's needs, how they communicate without words." Victoria reluctantly agreed to change their approach. Instead of trying to direct the action, the crew began to simply observe and document the natural flow of life at the research center. What they captured surprised everyone. They filmed Shadow guiding Marcus through his daily tasks with incredible precision, adjusting his pace and position based on terrain and obstacles. They recorded moments of quiet companionship as man and wolf worked in the herb garden, Shadow indicating different plants with gentle nudges while Marcus harvested what they needed. The breakthrough came during an unexpected incident. A young deer, confused by the camera equipment, wandered into the research center's compound. The prey animal's presence triggered Shadow's natural instincts, but what happened next astonished the film crew. Instead of charging or showing aggression, Shadow positioned himself between the deer and the humans, maintaining a calm presence until the frightened animal found its way back to the forest. The entire interaction was caught on camera, showing a level of self-control and intelligence that defied conventional understanding of wolf behavior. "That's our story," Danny exclaimed later, reviewing the footage. "Not just about a blind man and his wolf, but about redefining what we think is possible in the relationship between humans and wild animals." The documentary project evolved, becoming less about creating dramatic moments and more about capturing the authentic day-to-day reality of Marcus and Shadow's partnership. The crew documented their work with the research team, their interactions with the local community, and their continued role in mountain safety and rescue operations. Old Jack Turner, who had initially been skeptical of the film project, provided valuable historical context. "Wolves and humans used to work together. Like this," he explained on camera, his weathered face thoughtful. "Before we decided to dominate nature instead of understanding it. What Marcus and Shadow have, it's like remembering something our ancestors knew, but we forgot." The filming coincided with an important development in the research program. Dr. James Chen's team had been analyzing data from Shadow's tracking collar, discovering patterns that suggested the wolf was actively mapping and monitoring the entire valley ecosystem. "He's not just patrolling," Dr. Chen explained to the documentary crew. "He's creating a comprehensive awareness of everything happening in his territory: wildlife movements, environmental changes, potential threats, and he's sharing this information with us through his interactions with Marcus." Victoria's team captured the moment when this theory was proven dramatically. Shadow began displaying unusual behavior one morning, repeatedly trying to lead Marcus and the film crew to a specific location in the forest. Following the wolf's guidance, they discovered a contaminated stream that could have poisoned local wildlife and affected the town's water supply. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Chen exclaimed, collecting water samples while the cameras rolled. "Shadow detected the contamination before our regular monitoring systems could pick it up. He understood it was a threat, not just to wildlife, but to the human community as well." The documentary team's presence also captured challenging moments. They filmed Shadow's complex interactions with the wild wolf pack that still roamed the national forest, showing how he maintained a unique position as both part of human society and a respected figure in the wolf hierarchy. During one particularly intense encounter, the cameras recorded Shadow mediating between the wild pack and a group of hikers who had strayed into wolf territory. The wolf's ability to communicate with both species, preventing potential conflict, provided compelling footage that challenged traditional views of wolf behavior. Sarah, watching some of the preliminary edited footage, summed up what many were feeling. They came here expecting to film a simple human interest story, she observed. Instead, they're documenting something that could change how we think about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The impact of the documentary project reached beyond just recording events. The presence of the cameras seemed to make the local community more aware of the unique nature of what had developed in their valley. People began sharing their own stories of how Marcus and Shadow had influenced their views on wildlife conservation and human-animal relationships. Mary from the diner spoke about how Shadow would guide Marcus to her back door during snowstorms, accepting her offered treats with gentle dignity. The local schoolteacher described how the wolf would pause by the playground during his morning patrols, his presence both thrilling and reassuring to the children. Even Bob Henderson, who had once been their strongest critic, contributed to the documentary. "I was wrong about them," he admitted on camera. "That wolf has done more for this community than most humans I know. He's shown us that being wild doesn't mean being dangerous." As the filming progressed, Victoria found herself revising her entire concept of what the documentary should be. "We came here looking for drama," she told Marcus one evening. "But what we've found is something much more profound, a model for how humans and nature could coexist if we approached the relationship differently." Shadow, who had initially been wary of the film crew, gradually accepted their presence as part of his expanded territory. He began including their safety in his daily considerations, sometimes alerting them to approaching weather changes or guiding them away from unstable ground during filming. The documentary project, originally planned for a few weeks, extended into months as the crew discovered new layers to the story they were trying to tell. They captured the changing seasons, the daily challenges and triumphs, and the continuing evolution of the unique partnership between a blind man and a wolf who had chosen to bridge two worlds. Late spring brought unusual weather patterns to Pine Valley. The air hung heavy with moisture as dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Shadow paced restlessly through Marcus's cabin, his behavior growing increasingly agitated as the barometric pressure continued to drop. Emma Roberts arrived unannounced, her truck spraying gravel as she pulled into the driveway. "The weather service just issued a severe storm warning," she announced, hurrying inside. "They're talking about potential flash floods in the valley." Marcus felt Shadow press against his leg, the wolf's muscles tense with nervous energy. "He's been trying to tell me something's wrong all morning," Marcus said, running his hand along Shadow's back. "This is more than just a regular storm coming." The wolf's behavior had taken on a new urgency. He moved between the door and Marcus, making soft whining sounds that they had learned to associate with serious threats. Outside, the wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Sheriff Tom Parker's voice crackled over the emergency radio. "All units be advised. We're getting reports of multiple lightning strikes in the national forest. Fire risk is extreme with these conditions." The situation deteriorated rapidly. Within hours, the storm had developed into what meteorologists were calling a once-in-a-century weather event. Lightning strikes ignited several spot fires in the drought-stressed forest, while flash floods threatened the lower portions of Pine Valley. The research center transformed into an emergency command post. Dr. James Chen's team quickly repurposed their tracking equipment to monitor the spreading fires. Shadow, seemingly understanding the gravity of the situation, stationed himself by the main map table, his attention focused on the incoming reports. "We've got fires moving down from 3 different ridges," Tom announced, marking locations on the map. "The rain's heavy, but it's not enough to stop the spread. We need to evacuate the outlying properties before these blazes merge." Marcus felt Shadow's sudden shift in posture. The wolf's ears pricked forward, his body becoming alert in a way that everyone had learned to take seriously. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked softly. "Show us." Shadow led them to the western section of the map, indicating an area that hadn't yet been marked as dangerous. Through careful observation and tracking, they had discovered that Shadow could understand map representations of his territory. His insistence on this particular section carried significant weight. "There's an old mining tunnel system under that ridge," old Jack Turner explained, having arrived to offer his expertise. "If those fires hit the entrance points, they'll have natural chimneys straight through the mountain." The revelation added new urgency to their evacuation plans. Shadow worked tirelessly alongside the emergency teams, his acute senses proving invaluable in navigating the smoke-filled valleys and warning of approaching fire fronts. The wolf's behavior underwent a remarkable transformation during the crisis. His usual careful attention to Marcus's needs expanded to encompass the entire emergency operation. He seemed to understand that this situation required him to work independently while still maintaining his protective role. Dr. Chen, monitoring Shadow's movements through the tracking collar, made an astounding discovery. "He's creating evacuation corridors," the scientist explained, watching the data stream across his laptop. "Look at his movement patterns. He's actively marking the safest routes between the fire fronts." The wolf's intelligence and adaptability reached new levels as the crisis deepened. When a group of evacuees became disoriented in the thick smoke, Shadow found them and led them to safety, returning multiple times to guide others along the same route. But the greatest test came when the fires threatened the research center itself. The wind had shifted unexpectedly, driving a wall of flames toward their command post. Shadow's behavior became intensely focused, his movements deliberate and urgent. "He wants us to follow him," Marcus announced, recognizing the specific signals they had developed over their time together. "Everyone, gather your essential equipment. We need to move now." Some hesitated, reluctant to abandon their post, but years of working with Shadow had taught them to trust his instincts. The wolf led them along a route that seemed counterintuitive. At first, moving parallel to the fire front, rather than directly away from it. Their understanding came as they crested a small ridge. From this vantage point, those with sight could see that Shadow had led them to the only safe corridor remaining, as other potential escape routes had been cut off by the converging fires. The evacuation of the research center became a pivotal moment in Shadow's story. The wolf worked without rest, guiding groups to safety, then returning to help others. His endurance seemed supernatural, driven by a deep understanding of his responsibility to both his human companions and the wider community. Emma noticed something remarkable about Shadow's method during the evacuation. "He's not just leading people to safety," she observed. "He's teaching them how to move through the smoke, showing them how to stay low and check the ground temperature. He's sharing survival techniques that come naturally to him." The crisis lasted 3 days, during which Shadow barely stopped to rest. The wolf's intimate knowledge of the terrain, combined with his extraordinary sensory capabilities, proved crucial in preventing loss of life. When the rain finally intensified enough to help control the fires, the full extent of Shadow's contribution became clear. Dr. Chen's tracking data revealed that Shadow had covered more than 100 miles during the crisis, creating safe passages through the burning forest and repeatedly returning to guide people to safety. More impressively, he had somehow anticipated the fire's behavior, leading evacuees away from areas that would later become dangerous. "This goes beyond instinct or training," Dr. Chen explained during the emergency response. Review: Shadow demonstrated strategic thinking and long-term planning that we've never documented in any animal. He wasn't just reacting to the crisis, he was actively working to manage it. The aftermath of the fires brought new challenges and revelations. Much of Shadow's familiar territory had been transformed by the flames, yet he adapted quickly, using his enhanced senses to map the changed landscape. His behavior suggested an understanding that his role had evolved beyond just being Marcus's companion. He had become a guardian of the entire valley. The wolf's actions during the crisis attracted attention from environmental agencies and wildlife researchers across the country. Shadow had demonstrated that wolves could not only coexist with human communities, but actively contribute to their safety and survival. Old Jack, who had witnessed the entire event, shared his perspective with the gathered officials. "What we saw wasn't just about a wolf helping humans," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It was about rediscovering a partnership that existed long before we built our cities and drew our boundaries. Shadow showed us what's possible when we stop trying to control nature and start working with it instead." The fire's impact on Pine Valley created opportunities for Shadow to display new aspects of his intelligence. During the recovery efforts, he began identifying areas where the burn had made the ground unstable, preventing accidents before they could occur. His awareness of the changed environment helped the community adapt to their transformed landscape. Emma's regular checkups revealed something extraordinary about Shadow's physical condition after the crisis. Despite the intense exertion and smoke exposure, the wolf had somehow protected himself while helping others. He knew exactly how to navigate the dangers, she concluded. It's as if he understood not just his own limits, but how to work within them to help as many as possible. The documentary crew, who had captured much of the crisis on film, found themselves with a story far more powerful than they had anticipated. Victoria Blackwood, reviewing the footage, realized they had documented something unprecedented. A wild animal choosing to put itself at risk repeatedly to protect a human community. As Pine Valley began its recovery, the relationship between the community and their unusual guardian deepened. Shadow's actions during the crisis had demonstrated that the line between wild and domestic was more fluid than anyone had imagined. He remained a wolf with all the natural instincts and behaviors of his species, but he had chosen to use those abilities in service of a larger purpose. Marcus, reflecting on the events with Sarah one evening, found himself struggling to express the magnitude of what had occurred. "Everyone keeps talking about how extraordinary it is that a wolf would help humans this way," he said softly, as Shadow rested nearby. "But what's really extraordinary is that we finally learned to listen to what nature was trying to tell us." The fire crisis had transformed not just the landscape of Pine Valley, but the understanding of what was possible when humans and wildlife truly cooperated. Shadow had shown that intelligence, compassion, and the capacity for heroism weren't limited to human beings. They were qualities that could bridge the gap between species when given the chance to flourish. Summer settled over Pine Valley, bringing new growth to the fire-scarred landscape. Marcus sat in his garden, hands deep in the rich soil, while Shadow maintained his vigilant watch. The morning peace shattered with the arrival of an unexpected visitor, a silver-haired woman whose footsteps carried the weight of purpose. "I am Maria Redfeather," she announced, her voice carrying years of wisdom. "The elders of my tribe have sent me to speak with you about your wolf companion." Shadow's reaction surprised Marcus. Instead of his usual protective stance toward strangers, the wolf moved forward, greeting Maria with curious respect. Marcus heard the slight intake of breath from the visitor, followed by soft words in a language he didn't recognize. "He carries ancient medicine," Maria explained, settling onto the garden bench. "Our stories speak of spirit wolves who chose to walk between worlds, guiding humans when great changes were coming. We believe Shadow may be such a being." The suggestion might have seemed far-fetched months ago, but recent events had taught them all to keep open minds. Emma Roberts, arriving for her regular checkup, found herself drawn into the conversation as Maria shared stories passed down through generations. Our ancestors understood that wolves were not merely animals to be feared or tamed, Maria continued. They were teachers, showing us how to live in balance with the natural world. What you and Shadow have rediscovered is something very old, something many have forgotten. The conversation shifted the research center's focus. Dr. James Chen began incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into their studies, discovering that many of Shadow's seemingly unprecedented behaviors had parallels in indigenous stories from around the world. Maria's presence brought new depth to their understanding. She spent days observing Shadow, noting patterns in his behavior that others had missed. "He doesn't just help humans," she explained one evening. "He maintains balance. Watch how he interacts with all the beings in his territory." True to her words, Shadow's role in the valley's ecosystem proved more complex than anyone had realized. The wolf had developed a sophisticated understanding of the relationships between different species, often intervening in subtle ways to maintain ecological balance. The research team documented Shadow, preventing deer from overgrazing, recovering areas, guiding lost animals back to their territories, and even mediating conflicts between different species. His actions suggested a level of ecological awareness that transcended instinct. Old Jack Turner, who had been quietly observing these developments, shared his own insights. "My grandmother used to tell stories about wolf guardians," he revealed. "I always thought they were just tales to entertain children, but watching Shadow, maybe our ancestors understood something we're only now rediscovering." Maria's presence attracted attention from other indigenous communities. Elders traveled to Pine Valley, each bringing their own stories and observations. Shadow's behavior with these visitors revealed new aspects of his nature. He seemed to recognize their connection to ancient wisdom, treating them with a deference that surprised everyone. The wolf's interaction with a visiting medicine man became a turning point. The elderly man spent an entire day in silent communion with Shadow, afterwards sharing insights that would reshape their understanding of the wolf's capabilities. "He carries memories that are not his own," the medicine man explained through Maria's translation. "Knowledge passed down through generations of his kind, waiting for the right moment to be shared again with humans who were ready to listen." The doctor Chen's scientific mind struggled with these concepts, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Shadow displayed knowledge of healing plants that he couldn't have learned through ordinary means, often leading Marcus to specific herbs when someone in the community was ill. The wolf's behavior during the new moon particularly fascinated Maria. Shadow would spend these nights on a high ridge overlooking the valley, his howls carrying messages that seemed to bridge past and present. The wild pack would answer, their voices weaving together in what Maria called songs of remembering. Emma noticed physical changes in Shadow during this period. His movements became more deliberate, his presence more pronounced. "It's as if he's growing into a role he was always meant to play," she observed, watching the wolf guide a young fox away from dangerous territory. The research center began documenting traditional stories alongside their scientific observations, creating a unique archive that bridged different ways of knowing. Shadow's behavior often validated these ancient accounts, demonstrating that indigenous knowledge contained sophisticated understanding of wolf behavior and ecology. Maria's teachings extended beyond Shadow's role. She helped the community understand that their relationship with the wolf was part of a larger pattern of healing, between humans and nature, between different cultural traditions, between past and present. The impact rippled through Pine Valley. Local schools began incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into their curriculum, using Shadow's story to illustrate the importance of respecting and learning from nature. Children showed particular aptitude for understanding the wolf's various communications, often picking up on subtleties that adults missed. Shadow's interactions with the children became especially significant. He seemed to recognize their natural openness to learning, adjusting his behavior to teach them about their environment in ways they could understand. Parents reported their children developing deeper awareness of natural processes, guided by the wolf's example. The wolf's influence extended to forest management practices. Shadow's behavior during the recovery from the fires had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of ecological restoration. He would prevent people from entering areas that needed time to heal, while guiding them to locations where human intervention could help. Maria helped interpret these behaviors through the lens of traditional knowledge. "He's showing us how to be proper caretakers," she explained, "not by controlling nature, but by understanding our role within it." The research team documented an extraordinary example of this during a period of drought. Shadow began leading Marcus to different water sources throughout the valley, revealing a complex network of springs and seeps that many had forgotten existed. These ancient water sources proved crucial for wildlife survival during the dry spell. "Your wolf is helping us remember," Maria told Marcus one evening as they listened to Shadow's howls echoing across the valley. "Not just stories or traditions, but a way of being in the world that we desperately need to reclaim." The wolf's behavior seemed to evolve further under Maria's guidance. He began spending more time with the wild pack, but in a way that strengthened, rather than diminished, his connection to the human community. He appeared to be teaching the wild wolves how to coexist more harmoniously with humans, while showing humans how to respect wolf territory. Dr. Chen's team recorded fascinating interactions between Shadow and young wolves from the wild pack. He would demonstrate hunting techniques that minimized conflict with human activities, showing them safe corridors through the valley and appropriate prey choices. The indigenous elders saw these activities as fulfillment of ancient prophecies. "The stories tell of a time when the bridge between worlds would need to be rebuilt," Maria explained, "when a spirit wolf would help humans remember their place in the natural order." Shadow's methods of teaching proved remarkably sophisticated. He would create situations that allowed both humans and wolves to learn through experience rather than confrontation. His patience seemed infinite, his understanding of different learning styles profound. The wolf's influence began attracting attention from environmental organizations worldwide. Shadow had demonstrated a model of human-wildlife cooperation that transcended simple coexistence. He showed how ancient wisdom and modern conservation could work together to create more effective approaches to environmental challenges. Maria worked with the research center to document everything, ensuring that Shadow's lessons would be preserved for future generations. She emphasized that the wolf's teachings weren't just about human-wildlife relationships, but about remembering a more balanced way of living. As summer progressed, Shadow's role continued to evolve. He became not just a bridge between species, but between different ways of understanding the world. His actions demonstrated that the choice between modern science and traditional wisdom was a false one. Both approaches could work together to create deeper understanding. The wolf's presence had transformed Pine Valley into a living laboratory of coexistence, where ancient knowledge and modern research worked together to forge new possibilities for the future. Shadow showed that wisdom could flow both ways, from human to wolf, from past to present, from science to spirit and back again. Autumn returned to Pine Valley, painting the restored landscape in brilliant hues. Marcus stood motionless by the research center's entrance, feeling the crisp morning air while Shadow kept his customary vigil. The wolf's posture held an unusual tension, sensing something significant approaching. The sound of multiple vehicles echoed through the valley, a convoy of official cars making their way up the mountain road. Shadow's ears perked forward, but his demeanor remained calm, recognizing the importance of what was to come. Governor Eleanor Mitchell stepped from the lead vehicle, her security detail hovering nervously as Shadow approached to inspect the newcomers. The wolf's graceful assessment of the visitors demonstrated the perfect balance of wild dignity and civilized restraint that had made him legendary. "This is remarkable," the governor breathed, watching Shadow return to Marcus's side. "When they told me about your work here, I could hardly believe it, but seeing him in person..." The occasion marked the official designation of Pine Valley as the world's first wolf-human cooperative heritage site. The governor's visit would formalize protections for both the valley's wolf populations and the unique research programs that had grown around Shadow's extraordinary example. Dr. James Chen presented the accumulated data from years of study, while Emma Roberts shared medical insights that had revolutionized understanding of wolf behavior and intelligence. But it was Maria Redfeather's testimony that captured the true significance of what had been achieved in Pine Valley. "What we witness here is not new," Maria explained to the assembled officials. "It is very old wisdom being remembered. Shadow has helped us rediscover what our ancestors knew, that humans and wolves are not meant to be enemies or master and servant, but partners in maintaining the balance of life." The governor's visit coincided with another significant event. The wild pack that had long shared the valley was showing signs of accepting Shadow's unique role, not just tolerating, but actively participating in the cooperative relationship he had established with the human community. Dr. Chen's team documented young wolves from the wild pack beginning to mirror Shadow's behavior, showing the same careful consideration in their interactions with humans. It suggested that Shadow's influence was creating lasting changes in wolf behavior, passing on learned wisdom to the next generation. Old Jack Turner, watching the proceedings from his familiar spot on the research center's porch, shared his perspective with the governor's scientific advisors. "People think this is about training a wolf to help humans," he said, his weathered face thoughtful. "But it's really about humans learning to listen to what wolves have been trying to tell us all along." The formal ceremony was interrupted by an unexpected demonstration of exactly what made Shadow extraordinary. A sudden commotion from the forest caught everyone's attention. Shadow's posture changed instantly, his entire body focusing on something only he could sense. Without waiting for command or permission, the wolf moved with purpose toward the disturbance. The governor's security detail reached for their weapons, but Marcus raised his hand. "Wait," he said calmly. "Watch what happens." Shadow disappeared into the trees, returning moments later guiding a young moose that had become entangled in old fencing wire. The wolf's gentleness with the frightened animal and his clear communication with both the moose and approaching humans demonstrated levels of intelligence and empathy that transcended traditional understanding of wolf behavior. Emma and her team worked quickly to free the moose, while Shadow maintained a calming presence, showing the gathered officials in real time how the partnership between humans and wolves could work. The young moose, once freed, departed without panic, as if understanding it had been helped rather than threatened. "This is why Pine Valley is unique," Dr. Chen explained to the astonished governor. "Shadow doesn't just help humans, he maintains balance in the entire ecosystem. He's teaching both species how to coexist in ways we never imagined possible." The day's events led to expanded protection for the valley and its inhabitants. The governor signed executive orders establishing Pine Valley as a living laboratory for human-wildlife cooperation, ensuring that the lessons learned through Shadow's example would continue to influence conservation efforts worldwide. But as the official ceremonies concluded and the visitors departed, those who knew Shadow best noticed subtle changes in his behavior. The wolf seemed more contemplative, spending long hours gazing toward the distant mountains where the wild pack roamed. Maria recognized the significance of these changes first. He knows his work here is nearly complete, she explained to Marcus one evening as they listened to Shadow's deep howls echoing across the valley. He has taught what needed to be taught. Now he must ensure his legacy continues. The truth of Maria's words became clear in the following weeks. Shadow began spending more time with younger wolves from both the wild pack and new arrivals at the research center, seemingly passing on his unique understanding of human-wolf cooperation. Dr. Chen's team documented these teaching sessions with amazement. Shadow demonstrated sophisticated methods of communication, showing young wolves how to interpret human behavior and intentions, while simultaneously helping humans understand wolf signals and needs. The research center transformed into a school of sorts, where Shadow's accumulated wisdom could be passed on to both species. Young wolves learned to navigate human territories safely, while human students learned to read and respect wolf behavior. Shadow moved between these groups with the patience of a born teacher. Emma's medical observations revealed something extraordinary about Shadow's influence on other wolves. Those who spent time learning from him developed similar capabilities for understanding and cooperating with humans. It wasn't just learned behavior. Shadow was somehow awakening latent abilities that existed in all wolves. He's not just teaching them to tolerate humans, Emma explained during a research presentation. He's showing them how to maintain their wild nature while building cooperative relationships. It's a completely new model of coexistence. As autumn deepened toward winter, Shadow's teaching became more focused, more urgent. He seemed determined to ensure that his understanding would survive through others. The wolf spent long hours working with both species, demonstrating the delicate balance between wild instinct and cooperative behavior. The evidence of his success began to show throughout the valley. Young wolves from the wild pack started exhibiting similar protective behaviors toward human hikers, warning them away from dangerous areas or guiding lost individuals back to safe trails. They maintained their natural hunting patterns, but showed remarkable discretion around human settlements. Marcus, more attuned to Shadow's moods than anyone, sensed the significance of these changes. During their quiet evening moments together, he could feel a new quality in Shadow's presence, not a lessening of their bond, but a shift towards something larger, more universal. He's not just my guide anymore, Marcus explained to Sarah and Emma one evening. He's becoming a guide for all of us, showing us a way forward that we couldn't see before. The wolf's legacy was securing itself in unexpected ways. Children who had grown up watching Shadow began showing remarkable abilities to understand and communicate with wolves. The next generation of researchers approached their work with new perspectives, influenced by Shadow's demonstration that science and natural wisdom could work together. Pine Valley itself had been transformed. What began as an unusual partnership between a blind man and a wolf had evolved into a model for a new kind of relationship between humans and nature. Shadow had shown that the boundaries between wild and tame, between natural and human worlds, were more fluid than anyone had imagined. As the first snow of winter dusted Pine Valley, Shadow's howls carried new messages across the landscape. They spoke not of separation between species, but of connection, not of dominance, but of partnership, not of taming the wild, but of remembering how to live in harmony with it. The wolf's greatest gift had been showing that trust, when given the chance to grow naturally, could bridge any gap. Through Shadow, both humans and wolves had learned that true cooperation didn't require either species to abandon their nature. It simply required them to recognize the wisdom in each other. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right. On your screen, if this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.